It was a crisp, perfect October afternoon, the kind where the air smells like wood smoke and turning leaves. I was out on my back deck, a battered baseball cap pulled low, stacking the last of the season's firewood. The crackle of the split logs hitting the pile was a satisfying rhythm. I had spent 2 long weekends splitting, hauling, and seasoning this oak and hickory. Enough, I estimated, to keep my fireplace roaring through a harsh New England winter. That stack was more than just fuel. It was my winter insurance, my small victory against the cold. And that's when I saw her, standing perfectly still on the edge of my property line, her eyes scanning my neatly organized cords with a predatory glint. Before we dive into the chilling truth of how I brought down the neighborhood's most entitled tyrant, comment which country you're watching from, and what's the worst thing a neighbor has ever stolen from you. My name is Mark, and I live in what used to be a quiet, idyllic little community nestled just outside of town, until the HOA, specifically one woman, decided to turn it into her personal fiefdom. This woman, who I'll call Brenda, wore her HOA President title like a crown and a vest of armor combined, patrolling the streets in a golf cart that looked more like a miniature police cruiser. Every day was a hunt for a misplaced lawn gnome, an unsanctioned paint color, or in my case, the perceived transgression of a perfectly legal, well-stacked firewood pile. The air around her always seemed to carry a faint, acrid scent of cheap perfume and entitlement, a smell that had become synonymous with neighborhood anxiety. The first time my firewood disappeared, I dismissed it as a hungry vagrant or maybe kids playing a mean trick. It was just a small bundle, maybe 10 pieces taken right off the top. Annoying but not catastrophic. The second time, a week later, I started to feel that familiar prickle of unease. I had secured the pile with a heavy tarp and bungee cords, yet the outer layer had been systematically dismantled. It was too neat, too deliberate to be random. I walked the perimeter, my work boots crunching on the fallen leaves, and that's when I noticed the faint, almost invisible wheel tracks leading away from my shed, tracks that perfectly matched the narrow wheels of a golf cart. A suspicion, cold and sharp, lodged itself in my gut. I remembered seeing Brenda's cart parked oddly close to my property line the day before. The next day I installed a small, discreet security camera pointed directly at the woodpile, hiding it expertly within the dense branches of a spruce tree. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, around 3 a.m., the camera's motion detector sent a silent alert to my phone. I watched the live feed in disbelief from my warm bed. There she was, Brenda, in a dark tracksuit, pulling her little golf cart up to the pile. She wasn't stealing a piece. She was loading it up with ruthless efficiency, her face a mask of determined, self-satisfied malice as she heaved my hardened oak into her vehicle. The sight of her gloved hands carelessly tossing my firewood, my future warmth, ignited a slow, white-hot fury in my chest. This wasn't just theft, it was an act of pure, unadulterated arrogance, the ultimate abuse of her self-appointed authority. I had the evidence, the clear-cut proof of her criminal behavior. The obvious move would have been to take the video to the police or the HOA board, but I knew the drill. The board was made up of her friends, and the local police considered HOA disputes a civil matter, a headache they didn't want. They'd give her a slap on the wrist, and she would simply find another, more subtle way to torture me. I needed a solution that was perfectly legal, utterly dramatic, and that would make her think twice before ever crossing the property line again. A solution that would not just stop the theft, but publicly dismantle her false image of neighborhood sanctity. I started planning my revenge, a perfectly engineered piece of moral justice, the kind that plays out like a slow-burn thriller. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, anticipating the delicious moment when I would finally turn the tables on this tyrant. The planning phase was meticulously executed, a covert operation in my own garage, smelling of sawdust, old oil, and a developing sense of sweet, cold-blooded vindication. I knew that simply confronting Brenda would only result in a screeching denial and a fresh set of baseless fines slapped onto my door. She craved control, she thrived on the petty power granted to her by the HOA charter, and I realized the only way to truly stop her was to hit her where it hurt the most, her reputation and her unshakable belief in her own immunity. I needed a spectacle, a moment that would force the entire neighborhood, which had long been held hostage by her tyranny, to finally look up and see the monster she truly was. The core of my plan revolved around a simple substitution, an elegant switch that would turn her ill-gotten gains into her downfall. I drove 30 miles out of the community to a lumber yard where no one knew me, purchasing a dozen perfectly shaped logs of a soft, lightweight pine, slightly smaller than my dense oak pieces. Back in my garage, the air thick with the buzzing sound of power tools, I hollowed each log out using a heavy-duty drill and a specialized auger bit. It was precision work, slow and tedious, but with every rotation of the bit, I felt the satisfying removal of wood fiber representing a slice of the control she thought she had over me. The resulting shells were convincing, indistinguishable from the outside. The crucial element, the heart of my trap, was the filling. I acquired 4 small cans of black powder, the kind used for historical reenactment firearms, perfectly legal to possess in my state. It wasn't an explosive that would cause any real structural damage, but it would certainly create a stunning, terrifying, and completely controlled reaction. I carefully packed the powder into the hollowed-out logs, sealed the ends with a mixture of dark-colored wax and sawdust, and let them cure for a day. To ensure the trap worked perfectly, I drilled a tiny, almost invisible fuse hole and inserted a small, heat-sensitive fuse deep inside the log that would ignite only when the wood was fully engulfed in flame, not just smoldering. I marked them with a tiny, inconspicuous notch on the underside, a secret symbol only I knew. They were now sitting among my real firewood, Trojan horses waiting for their thief. A week passed and the pattern repeated. Brenda, emboldened by my apparent inaction, returned for another haul. I watched the security feed as she shamelessly loaded 5 of the specially prepared logs, a triumphant, almost giddy smile on her face. The next day I received a notice from the HOA, a fine for improper storage of combustible materials. The audacity of the thief fining her victim for the very thing she was stealing was breathtaking. This confirmed my suspicion. She believed she was untouchable. This was the final straw. It was time for the curtain to rise. That Saturday was the community's annual winter welcome potluck, hosted at Brenda's expansive, pristine property, the kind of house that screams, "I deserve this." The main draw, besides the terrible casseroles, was her gigantic outdoor stone fireplace, which she always dramatically lit just as the sun set. I arrived late, bringing a salad I knew no one would touch, wearing a calm, almost serene expression. The air was buzzing with the forced cheer of nervous neighbors, all silently hopping not to be Brenda's next target. I found a corner near the back, waiting, listening to the strained conversations and the sound of dry pine catching fire with a sharp whoosh from the main fireplace. The fire had been burning for almost an hour, a steady, innocent roar of flame, and I knew she would be adding her premium, stolen logs, my logs, soon. I watched from my quiet corner, my heart beating a low, steady drum against my ribs, the tension in my posture almost visible. The party was in full swing. 50 or 60 neighbors were scattered across Brenda's expansive patio, clutching mugs of spiked cider. The mood was artificially bright, but underneath the forced smiles, you could feel the communal, underlying fear of their HOA president. Just as the sun dipped completely behind the pine trees, casting the yard in a deep, pre-twilight shadow, Brenda approached her massive stone hearth with a theatrical flourish. She was holding a cast-iron bucket, and I recognized the contents immediately, my stolen oak, intermixed with the 5 specially prepared hollow logs. She paused, facing the crowd, and delivered her annual community message, a patronizing monologue about property values and the need for standards, her voice amplified by a cheap handheld speaker. And of course, she declared, her eyes sweeping over the nervous faces, we must thank all of you who maintain the beauty of our neighborhood, ensuring our shared spaces remain pristine. The hypocrisy was thick enough to cut with a knife. As she spoke, she carelessly tossed the logs, one by one, onto the already established bed of crackling embers. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, not of regret but of pure adrenaline-fueled anticipation. It's happening now. The first 2 logs were regular oak, catching fire with a slow, reassuring burn. Then she tossed the 3rd log, one of the hollowed, packed pieces, right into the center. The intense heat of the established fire began to work on the outer pine shell. For several agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The crowd was distracted, sipping their drinks, trying to avoid eye contact with their HOA overlord. I focused on the log, watching the edges turn black, the tiny, sealed fuse beginning to cook inside. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught my attention. A small, almost imperceptible plume of dark smoke erupted from the center of the log, followed by a low, sizzling sound, like oil hitting a hot pan. Then the world exploded. Not a destructive, shattering blast, but a massive, deafening boom followed by a colossal fountain of white-hot embers, black powder residue, and a shockwave of sound that shook the patio furniture. The sound was so immense that a dozen car alarms immediately started wailing down the street. A spectacular 3-story column of fire and glittering sparks shot straight out of the chimney and the open mouth of the fireplace, showering the patio in a rain of harmless but terrifying soot and ash. Glasses dropped, screams erupted, and everyone, including Brenda, hit the deck. I saw one man dive behind a potted fern, and another overturn the entire potluck table in his rush to escape. The pure chaos was intoxicating. Brenda, covered head to toe in soot, scrambled backward, her face a mask of shock and pure, venomous rage. The immense, controlled explosion had completely extinguished the fire, leaving the stone hearth smelling strongly of sulfur and burned wood. A silence fell over the crowd, broken only by the hysterical sobbing of Brenda's poodle and the lingering whoop-whoop of distant car alarms. A neighbor from across the street, a former firefighter, slowly got up, brushing ash off his tweed jacket. "Brenda," he said, his voice quiet but carrying, "what in God's name was in that wood?" It sounded like a cannon. Her eyes, wide and manic, immediately locked onto me. It was him, it was Mark, she shrieked, pointing a trembling, blackened finger. He must have put something in the wood, he's trying to poison me. I calmly stepped forward, a serene, almost pitying look on my face. Poison Brenda, or maybe, you should look at where the wood came from. I pulled out my phone, navigating to the video I had recorded 2 nights prior, the one showing her stealing the logs. I didn't say a word, I simply held the phone up, letting the bright screen display the undeniable footage of her loading my logs into her cart, for all the stunned neighbors to see. The silence that followed was heavy with revelation. Her facade had been shattered, not by an argument, but by a spectacular, self-inflicted act of criminal comeuppance.